Covering the veteran artists from pop, rock, soul, country, folk, and blues that influence today's music world, this is the VVN Music Podcast. I'm Roger Wink, and on today's show, we talk with Ted Kalo of the Music First Coalition and look back at This Week in Music in 1963. Welcome to Episode 4 of the VVN Music Podcast. Normally, we talk about the news of the week and look at a few new releases before moving on to our interview. But we're going to forego all of that this week and talk about one of the biggest issues facing music artists today. The world of music is changing. First, we moved from physical distribution of music to digital, but music was still being sold and artists still received royalties for those sales. Now we're starting to transition to streaming. Nothing is being sold except the service, and some musicians, especially older ones who are barely making ends meet, are looking at a future where they will receive nothing for their efforts. These veteran artists that we cover on VVN Music don't receive any royalty payments when their music is played on major online services, whether they be streamed on demand or through any new technology. Even worse, no artists get paid for the playing of their music on AM and FM radio. That inequity is addressed in the Fair Play, Fair Pay bill that was introduced in Congress earlier this year. Last week, I had the pleasure of talking with Ted Kalo, who spent 15 years working in the Capitol building in Washington before becoming executive director of the Music First Coalition. Music First was created in 2007 with the mission of ensuring that music creators can earn a living from their work. The coalition includes artists, record labels, and other industry organizations, including the Recording Academy, the RIAA, the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, Sound Exchange, and many more. The organization, with Mr. Kalo, who is a lifelong music fan at the helm, has already proven that change is possible for the betterment of the artists. And an artist coalition recently saw Amazon drop from its ranks in favor of supporting musicians. Then, this past Friday, 4 days after this interview was recorded, SiriusXM announced that they will begin paying performance royalties to artists who recorded music prior to February 1972. Mr. Kalo talked to us from his office in Washington. There's two sections of the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act that directly affect the veteran artists. One is the AM/FM stations and the fact that they have not, for many decades, paid any royalties to the artists.
That's correct. So for, forever, AM/FM radio has been exempt from paying the performers and copyright owners. They do pay the publishers and songwriters, and it's really a historical anachronism dating back to when Congress first started doing copyright for music. Back then, there were player pianos and sheet music, and the notion of recorded performances wasn't something that was known. Over time, broadcasters successfully made the argument to Congress that they were promoting music sales and were able to keep this exemption. In the late 90s, Congress decided that digital services like internet and satellite radio should pay the performer and artist. They maintain the exemption for AM/FM radio under the same argument. Today, there really could be no question that whatever promotional value FM radio had years ago, it certainly doesn't have it now. If they're promoting record sales, they're really doing a terrible job at it. They're not promoting record sales, and as we move to an economy where consumers are buying less music and instead paying to listen to it either through ad-supported streaming services or paid subscription services like Pandora, the paid version, or SiriusXM, it no longer makes sense that AM/FM radio would be the only form of radio that doesn't pay the performer and artist.
Well, I used to be in radio, and this goes way back into the 70s. And at the time, the argument, of course, was always that they were promoting, as you said. But back then, when there was a record played, we would say who the artist was, what the song was. maybe give some information about it. If a set of music was played on a progressive station, then they would come back and say all of the different songs that were played. That isn't done anymore, so I really don't see how they're promoting.
I totally agree with that, and I just add on that when you were in radio, you were breaking a lot of new acts, and there's a really interesting article earlier this year by a reporter named Hannah Karp at the Wall Street Journal, and what she detailed was that AM/FM radio's response to the advent of internet radio has been to play less songs with a heck of a lot more repetition. They're basically trotting over the same 10 well-worn hits an hour, to the extent to which, A, they're not really breaking new acts, and B, some of those big acts, as detailed in the article, one of them, Capital Cities, which had a gigantic hit, Safe and Sound, over the last couple years, became increasingly frustrated that their second single couldn't get airplay because they were still playing their first single to death. And as you probably know, and your listeners probably know, someone needs to hear at least two good songs, but most people do, before they even think about buying an album, to the extent they buy albums at all anymore.
You also can see it, as you mentioned, in the length that radio plays songs now. Back in the 60s, if a song was on the charts for 15 or 18 weeks, that was like outstanding. Now we're breaking records where records are on the charts for 60, 70, and 80 weeks. And yeah, I agree. That leaves very little room for new music.
Right, and so those are our twin arguments for sustaining this exemption. We're promotion of existing acts and breaking new acts, and that isn't really happening. And in the meantime, sales of recorded music have plummeted, and it's just long past time that we pay performers for their performances. A performance like Aretha Franklin's Respect. Otis Redding was a great songwriter and performer himself, and I think it's great that he gets paid when Respect is played on AM/FM radio. But Aretha Franklin also made that song, and she should have gotten paid when it was played as well.
Now, did you say that the AM and FM stations also stream? They're not paying anything for their streams either?
They are paying when they stream, which highlights the hypocrisy. Once they start streaming over the internet, they are required to pay a performance royalty. They cross over into the digital services that Congress required a payment of a performance royalty from starting in the late 90s. Why it makes sense that they would be paying through broadcasting through your computer and not through your car stereo is beyond me. And on your car stereo, how it makes sense when services like AM/FM radio exist alongside Sirius XM, are increasingly existing alongside Pandora radio on your car dashboard or through your smartphone. How it is that the same song could play on three of those, and on one of them the artist doesn't get paid, just makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, I just saw an article recently that I believe it was the Netherlands is phasing out FM radio completely by, I believe it's 2017 or 2018, and I think that kind of points to how streaming is starting to come into the cars, and AM and FM may have just a little bit of time left.
Well, so people are predicting the demise of terrestrial radio. I'm not. I think that's a safe bet. I just don't know what the timeline is, and my feeling is that it could be longer than people think. I mean, we're a country where people listen to so much music in their cars. You look at a country that's just come out of a major recession, where people have owned their cars for the longest period of time. That if you look over studies, they've owned it, in many, many years. People are driving the same car for a long time. A lot of people's cars aren't equipped with the technology that is needed to receive these, new kinds of broadcasts. So I think there's a probably a longer period of time that AM/FM radio will be around. I think clearly the AM/FM radio broadcasters are trying to transition to digital, and I just had something that's really unfortunate about that is they're leveraging this advantage they have over the digital services into the digital space. You see a big company like Clear Channel, now they call themselves iHeartRadio, whatever that means. I guess they don't heart artists very much. But they are leveraging that to get favorable deals for themselves on streaming and to build a brand on streaming, which is a disadvantage to innovative new digital services as well. I don't always see eye to eye with those digital services, but I at least think we ought to have a level playing field.
Well, I would agree completely with that, and I don't know how these larger companies can think that they can do better. I mean, one of the arguments I always heard against a bill such as this was that, hey, it's going to hurt the small radio stations. And I've seen that has been taken care of in this bill, and that a small station would only pay, I believe it's $500 a year, and even better, the college and public stations would only pay $100 a year, which is a great way to shut down that argument.
You're paying close attention, and I really appreciate you citing those figures because they're important. So the bill basically requires those flat fee payments of $500 or less for 75% of all music formatted stations in the United States. All of them with annual revenues of less than $1 million would pay $500 a year or less. That's less than the cost of a plane ticket for them to fly to D.C. and claim that a performance right would hurt them on the National Association of Broadcasters' big lobby day. So that's very little for them to pay. What do we get in exchange? We get a reciprocal right. What most people don't know is because we don't have a performance right, we stand alone with Iran and North Korea in not having one, and other countries do. When our music is played in other countries, instead of paying our artists for airplay, they keep the money. We say we don't have reciprocity with them. Over $100 million of money that should go to U.S. artists is held overseas because we haven't established this right in our law.
And it's about time that we did. I've been championing this for probably 5 years now, and I'm thrilled to see something come along that really addresses so much of the issue in such a favorable way.
Thank you so much for paying attention and for your advocacy on this. It's such an important issue. We have a chance to make the world better for the next generation of music creators and the new generation coming up right now. We have a chance to do right by the people who are icons of music and the people who you may not have heard of who played alongside them and who literally built the music that we're listening to today. And we can't let that chance go by. We've got to let Congress know that there are more people who create music and who love the people who create music than there are people who want to exploit those folks.
Now, it's also my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this bill also closes the loophole in the copyright law that's allowing Spotify, Pandora, and so forth to avoid paying royalties to recordings made pre-1971?
You are correct. So some lawyers for SiriusXM thought they had spotted a loophole in federal copyright and state copyright law. Federal copyright law doesn't kick in until this kind of arbitrary date in mid-February 1972, which no one who's ever studied it can figure out why Congress picked it. But so it is. And instead, state law applies. And SiriusXM and then Pandora after them said, you know what, we don't think state law requires us to pay for pre-72 music, so we're going to stop paying for pre-72 music. They've been laughed out of court in California and New York in some very strong language in the judicial opinions. Older performers and artists can't wait for us to litigate this issue in all 50 states. So this bill would settle once and for all any question that's out there about this ridiculous notion that pre-72 songs are worth less than a song recorded after February 15th, 1972, and say instead that all music has value and has worth, and those songs, those performers should be compensated too. I've had the privilege of meeting some of them, and you know, a lot of them are really still very vibrant people who are out there singing and touring, and others are kind of in the twilight years of their life. They don't have a 401k. Their royalties are their 401k, and I think we owe it to show them the respect of having digital services pay for their music.
And it's especially important for those who recorded during the 50s and early 60s, because oldies radio formats now are starting to move to a 1964 and forward format. So the place where you hear the early works of Freddie Cannon and people like that is going to be on streaming services.
That's right. So my mom is probably the biggest Motown fan in the world, and the AM/FM station in her, where I grew up in the Research Triangle Park, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, switched formats. So she subscribes to Sirius XM for the sole purpose of listening to these, 60s era records. And the fact that Sirius XM has stations that are devoted to nothing but that, the 50s on 5, the 60s on 6, some of the 70s on 7, they have entire stations that are formatted to classic rock and other things that play a ton of pre-72 music. And that's how they market themselves. But they then turn around to the people who performed that music and say your music's worth nothing, while they're selling subscriptions and marketing themselves because they have that music. It's not just wrong as a matter of law and policy, it's moral. And the fact that on Pandora you can set up a station around a pre-72 act or a pre-72 song and hear a succession of those songs, and they think that it has value to set up an algorithm that does that and gives somebody who wants that other music from pre-72. And then they turn around and say the artist who made that music, it means nothing, is just immoral. And this bill closes that loophole.
Beyond those two parts, which are, I think, the biggest parts that are important to the veteran artists that we cover so much of, what are some of the other artist protections that are provided in the bill?
Yeah, so there are a few other things. So first, in the late 90s, when Congress established this performance right for streaming and digital services we were talking about, Sirius and XM were two separate companies called something else, literally struggling to get off the ground. They hadn't launched a satellite in the sky yet. And they had a very powerful senator on their side who said this bill isn't passing to pay performers unless you do something for these people who've already started their businesses. So Sirius and XM were grandfathered at a below-market royalty rate. That means while Pandora Radio pays, unless it's pre-72, a fair market value to the performer for their airplay, SiriusXM pays under a more favorable royalty rate. Now SiriusXM has merged, and they are a multi-billion-dollar company. This bill would require them to pay fair market value just like all other digital services do. Second, it would require direct payment through Sound Exchange to the artist of their share, at least 50% of the royalties. None of that 50% would pass through a record label. None of it is subject to recoupment. And finally, producers and engineers have long been recognized in the contracts they have with recording artists for their contributions. And to the extent the artist is willing and the producer and engineer wants it, it would provide streamlined direct payment of the royalty to the producer and engineer. So those are the basic parts of it, and there's a lot there, but it's very easily summarized, and that is fair market pay for all artists on all radio platforms. That's all we're asking for.
Does some of that also trickle down to the session musicians, like the Wrecking Crew and so forth?
Great point. So session musicians, under federal law and this for streaming services, and this bill would continue the practice for the new AM/FM performance royalty, they get a designated percentage of the royalties. They get at least 5% of royalty payments from the songs. So the classic kind of sidemen of music get a designated percentage of the royalty payments, and I've met them and I've talked to them, and already on the digital side, they're seeing the difference between, having to work well into their 70s and barely making ends meet. If we're able to do this for them on the AM/FM side, it might be the difference between just making ends meet and being able to live a reasonable retirement like everybody deserves to have.
Yeah, that would be fantastic if that could happen. I know there's a lot of artists, and this seems to be coming up more and more every day. I mean, over the weekend, we had the situation with Taylor Swift and the Apple streaming service, where she wrote the open letter, and Apple has now relented to pay royalties for the first 3 months when their new service is free. Also, James Taylor just came out in the last couple days and said that he feels that on digital platforms that he deserves 50% of the income from it. So more and more big artists are really getting on board with this.
So it's extremely helpful for people who have a large platform and a lot of people listen to stand up and say you got to respect music and the art. And it is an art, and art isn't free, and you have to provide a means of incentivizing the creation of the art. Otherwise, you're not going to like what you get. And mobilizing other artists and fans is something critical that we are working day and night on. And I just appreciate so much them standing up and showing self-respect in terms of the value of what they've created, and sending a message to other musicians that it's safe to say you need to respect the art of music and you need to encourage and incentivize the creation of it. I think it's wonderful that they're speaking out, and I think that message is gaining incredible traction.
Now, there's the other part here that I have a fear of, and that is that I'm assuming there's some heavy lobbying going on up on Capitol Hill with NAB, iHeartRadio, and so forth.
Well, yeah, I mean, they spend, you look at multi-million-dollar lobbying budgets on this issue alone. When you look at the disclosure forms they're required to file. So that's a tough thing, and that's what a special interest does. They want to keep taking someone else's work for free and running a profit off of it. I get it, but there is a power to having the right argument and the right idea. And if we at a grassroots level speak out in greater volume than they are, and there are more of us than there are of them, it will make a difference. I saw it over and over in the 15 years I worked in Congress, where if enough people spoke out, money doesn't win. Money only wins when nobody is looking. So let your Congress folks know that you're watching this carefully. It matters to you. You're looking at what they do, and you support the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act.
And that was going to be my next question, which is what can people do? And I guess the best thing they can do then is to get a hold of their own Congress people and let them know what they feel.
That's right. And we've created a really easy way to do it. Go to fairplayfairpay.org, and it will send you right to the site where you can write a letter to your congressman, and then if you care to, and I hope you do, tweet and use your other social networks to encourage your friends and family to do it. Email your friends and family, use all your social networks. Don't forget there are more people who create music and who love them than people who want to exploit them. If only we let ourselves be heard, we will win.
Let's take the bright outlook here and figure that this does go through Congress and it does win. What does Music First have on its docket for other areas where you can see places you can make improvements for the artists?
Well, so we're very much focused on this new digital landscape, and there are a lot of players that aren't covered by this bill because of various distinctions that Congress has made in the law. You hear artists complaining about just unbelievably coercive terms offered to them by YouTube, for example. Here you have Google, which is a company that seems to do nothing but profit by either forcing artists to give their music to them or letting other people take it for free. There's a new coalition that has sprung up that seems devoted to ripping off artists called the Mic Coalition, that's led by Google and Pandora and the National Association of Broadcasters, and even joined by people we used to think were the good guys like NPR. So we're focused on not just radio royalties, but ensuring that this digital future is one that includes fair compensation for artists, and that we don't have this new boss that is cheating them out of their share of what they need to make a living and to incentivize their creativity.
Did I read that Amazon has actually dropped out of that new group?
Yeah, so we're pretty frustrated that Amazon was part of that group. They're not somebody, certainly they've played hardball with other creators, but they haven't popped up a lot in terms of being a markedly bad actor in the music space. And we were very disappointed when we saw them as part of that coalition. And the Music First Coalition made a point of responding whenever we saw their ads on social media to the ad, letting folks know they probably shouldn't patronize the Amazon Music service, given how Amazon was cheating artists. We applaud them for dropping out of it. We accept at face value their rationale. They thought they were talked into doing something about greater transparency in music licensing, which all of us favor. And they were very disappointed that this coalition was so focused on lowering royalties. And they said so publicly when they dropped out. I'm very proud that they had the courage to drop out, and I am especially proud that they had the courage to blow the whistle and tell us all why.
That's fantastic that they did that.
Yeah.
What is the schedule as far as an actual vote on the bill?
So I don't know how close an observer. I can tell you're a close observer of Congress. Your audience may or may not be. Nothing happens quickly in Congress these days. But the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee is reviewing copyright law, and the Register of Copyrights, who's Congress's lead advisor on this area, says music licensing is the low-hanging fruit, and the lack of an AM/FM performance royalty is an embarrassment. I expect the Congress is going to continue to look at these inequities for the remainder of the year and kind of gauge where the public is and where the support is and where their constituents are. And I think and so it's very important that we mobilize ourselves in big numbers right now to show them that. And I think they're going to turn before the end of the year to think about what the law they're going to write next looks like, and whether it'll be a music licensing system that's evergreen and it's built around principles, or whether it will be a music licensing system like today's that is built around special interests.
Well, I really want to thank you for everything that you are doing there, and the people you're working with that are trying to fix this horrendous inequity for so many of the artists that we listen to.
And I want to thank you for everything you're doing to shine a light on just the legendary music that's out there that so many of us grew up with and still love and listen to, and the people who create it.
Well, thank you. It's something that there isn't a lot of out there, and that's one of the reasons we started doing it 10 years ago, and we're still going today.
Congratulations.
Our thanks to Ted Kalo and Music First for the interview and their ongoing efforts to ensure fair compensation to music makers old and new. This week, we look back at the top 10 52 years ago on June 29, 1963. Many rock historians will tell you that music at this time was in a bit of a doldrums. Many of the great early rock artists, such as Chuck Berry and Little Richard, had seen their sales drop off, and the era of vocal groups was fading. Elvis Presley was in Hollywood and not turning out as many records, and it would be 6 months before the British invasion would start. Music was looking for direction, and although Phil Spector was making classic music with his girl groups, and surf music had found a portion of the audience, no major movement was in the offering. At number 10 was Jan and Dean's biggest hit, Surf City. The song was originally written by Brian Wilson, who gave it to Jan Berry when he didn't think the Beach Boys would ever record it. Berry wrote additional lyrics along with Dean Torrance, who never received a writing credit on the song, and it went on to become the first surf song to reach number 1 on the national charts. Chuck Berry had a string of 15 singles hit the Billboard Hot 100 before the string was broken in 1959 with his song Memphis, Tennessee. Berry Needn't Worry as his version hit the top 10 in the UK and was also a hit in the US for Johnny Rivers. In 1963, guitarist Lonnie Mack based his own single, Memphis, on Berry's original, and even though he took a writing credit on the record, he also included Berry as a co-writer. Memphis went on to be recognized as one of the groundbreaking guitar instrumental hits, with Guitar World ranking it as the greatest rock instrumental of all time.
Hey, pretty baby, don't you hear the drummer thumping? You gotta shake it like a crazy, cause the band is saying something. Everybody is a-jumping. You gotta slop, bop, flip, flop, hip-hop all around.
The Dovells were two hit wonders of the early 60s. The Philadelphia-based group first hit the top 10 in 1961 with the Bristol Stomp, and 2 years later returned with You Can't Sit Down, a song that was, in part, based on an old gospel tune. Written by Dee Clark of Raindrops fame, lyricist Cal Mann, and Cornell Muldrew, the song had been previously recorded by the Phil Upchurch Trio prior to the Dovells making it a hit. One Fine Day was originally written by Carole King and Jerry Goffin for Little Eva, but the pair couldn't put together a suitable arrangement for the singer. The song and King's original demo tape were passed along to the Tokens, who had just produced the hit He's So Fine for the Chiffons. They kept King's original driving piano part from the demo, added their own arrangement, and had the vocals done by the Chiffons, eventually peaking at number 5.
Roll out those lazy, hazy, crazy days of summer, those days of soda and pretzels and beer.
At number 6 is the final top 10 hit for Nat King Cole. Cole had reached prominence during the 40s and early 50s, but even as rock music was being embraced by the listening public, Cole found a way to continue to have hits right up until the time of his death in 1965. In all, Nat King Cole had 51 singles hit the charts between 1955 and 1964.
My friends all tell me, go to him, run to him, say sweet lovely things to him and tell him he's the one. Deep in my heart.
The Essex were another early 60s group that were two hit wonders. Formed by 4 members of the Marines, they brought in female vocalist Anita Humes to sing lead and signed with Roulette, where their song Easier Said Than Done would go on to hit the top of the American charts. They came back later in 1963 with A Walkin' Miracle, which peaked at number 12.
Blue on blue, heartache on heartache, blue on blue, now that we are through.
Bobby Vinton was at number 4 this week in 1963 with the second of his eventual 9 top 10 hits in the U.S., Blue on Blue. Although many of Vinton's hits were covers of earlier standards, Blue on Blue was a new song written by the young songwriting team of Burt Bacharach and Hal David. The success of the record inspired Vinton to record an entire album of songs with blue in the title, including the chart-topping hit Blue Velvet.
Hello, stranger.
Barbara Lewis was a rare double threat. Not only was she a great R&B singer, but she also wrote much of her own material, including the song at number 3 this week, Hello, Stranger. With backing vocals by the Dells, the song was picked up by Atlantic Records, who initially didn't release it to the public, deeming it too outside of the norm. But when Ruby and the Romantics had a hit with Our Day Will Come, Atlantic changed their mind and unleashed what would become Lewis's biggest hit.
It's my party and I cry if I want to, cry if I want to, cry if I want to. You would cry too if it happened to you.
It's My Party, at number 2 this week in 1963, was not only the first hit single for Leslie Gore, but was also the first one for her producer, Quincy Jones. Jones had made a name for himself previously in jazz circles, but with Gore, he was stepping into the world of pop and rock. The two reviewed over 200 demos, looking for something to record, and It's My Party came out as the only song on which the two could agree. They recorded a demo, but the song didn't go anywhere until Jones caught wind of a Phil Spector-produced version by the Crystals. Jones himself rushed out and pressed 100 copies, servicing them to radio stations, getting the jump on Spector. Topping the chart this week in 1963 was the first record by an Asian artist to ever hit number 1 on the Billboard charts. Kiyu Sakamoto was already a star in his native Japan when Louis Benjamin, the owner of Britain's Pie Records, heard a song by Sakamoto a number of times while on a business trip. He brought the record back to England but changed the original name to Sukiyaki, figuring it would be more easily remembered by English audiences. Capitol picked up the song for release in the U.S., and it eventually settled in at number 1 on the Billboard charts for 3 weeks in June of 1963. At this point in time, Billboard had 2 album charts, one for mono releases and one for stereo. Often different albums would be at the top of each, but not during the summer of 1963, when Andy Williams' The Days of Wine and Roses was at number 1 on both charts for 12 weeks. Over in the UK, the artists that would make up the British invasion in the U.S. the following year were already having major hits. The Beatles' From Me to You, their first major hit, had just left the number 1 spot to be replaced by I Like It by Jerry and the Pacemakers. On the albums chart, the Beatles' Please Please Me was in the midst of his 30-week run at number 1, which started on May 5th and would end on December 1st when they would replace themselves with the album With the Beatles. All told, those 2 albums would spend 1 week short of a full year occupying Britain's number 1 spot. Well, that's it for another edition of the VVN Music Podcast. For the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues, check in at vvnmusic.com. And if you have any comments or questions about the website or this podcast, please send them to vvnnetwork@gmail.com. Our theme music is performed by Yahar. This program was recorded on June 29, 2015, and is a production of the VVN Network. Copyright 2015.